who don't live close enough to flicker don't really know what it's like, but it would put the crap out of me. I can see that.
But even though we have a court order limiting them so that the shadow flicker does not affect us, the link, what you were talking about, the bouncing of the light off of
Yes.
the cell, it is literally a strobe light. That is, and I just can't imagine.
Right. What she's talking about there is the effect of the sunlight reflecting off the blades. It's a little bit different from flicker, which is the shadow that you get when the sun shines through the blades. But when the sun's on the other side, the glint comes off, and it's just like a car mirror or something like that that's on front of you in the road. You're getting that flash at you all the time. That kind of, there's things they could do with paint or whatever that would reduce that somewhat. The main problem here was you have local officials who want to be green. There's a big buzz about wind being green, the appropriate thing, et cetera, don't want to hamper that kind of thing, want to see the progressive, et cetera. Don't have experience with this type of technology, don't know what the things are, kind of assuming that like, well, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, not a problem, let's go ahead and do it, and then to find out. I had a proposal by a developer who has a piece of property over by Hump, right next to the interstate. He wanted to build a shopping mall, office park, and then the recession hit. Well, that land didn't seem so good anymore. What do I do with this 240 acres? I'll build a 10-turbine wind farm. Okay, you know, inside the city of Hump, city limits. And after the wind farm is built, then I'll build the office buildings and the commercial buildings right inside the wind farm. Now, I called up Hump and I said, whoa, you guys want to think about this really, really hard. Because we're talking industrial scale turbines here. I don't know who's going to want to rent the office space in the middle of the wind farm, work in the middle of the wind farm, and it's right next to Route 47 and I-90 intersection. You're going to get the shadow flicker and stuff on the drivers and all that stuff all the time. Interestingly enough, in Illinois, most of the turbines are built far enough from the highway. You don't get that. I was on Route 41 in Indiana around Thanksgiving. Boy, you're driving through 500 turbines and their shadows are on the highway all the way through. It's not particularly distressing, but if you had to live through it all the time, then you get old real early, that kind of thing. But now, the one thing about the Libertyville controversy that's been positive is that it sure got a lot of people's attention in Lake County. Okay, Lake County has been leading a group of 10 or so municipalities, putting their heads together. Well, how do we regulate these things? Or how should we regulate these things? Or what should we ought to do about it? And part of the problem with that is, when you're talking residential scale turbines or even business scale turbines, there are so many different designs, it's hard to write an ordinance that covers all these things, and every one has a different set of environmental effects, a different degree of impact, whether it's the flicker or the noise, that type of thing. You would almost have to have a separate set of regulations for each type of turbine that would be put up. The small ones concern me. Every small manufacturer's website I've been to says the big ones don't kill very many birds, we're smaller, so we kill even less. There's no scientific proof of that whatsoever. The smaller turbines are going to be closer to the trees, lower down in urban forests, closer to the wetlands. It's McHenry County right now. If it's under 100 kilowatts, you can build it as a matter of right. You don't have to get any kind of county permit. You don't have to get a building permit or anything like that. And it concerns me for things like the yellow-headed blackbirds. We discovered yellow-headed blackbirds will not nest in marsh edges where the tree line is more than 30 degrees above the horizon. But that may be anything that's more than 30 degrees above the horizon, including the wind turbine. And when you've got a lot of this estate-type zoning, where people have 10 acres, well, I can put a 150-foot tower out there at back of my property. You're thinking about me, it's going to be close to a wetland or something. There could be a lot of impacts on breeding birds. And I will never see those because in McHenry County, no government has to authorize it. It's just a matter of right. And if the government doesn't have to authorize it, I don't have the right to look at it or evaluate it. Now, you could come to me as an individual and say, I would like your opinion, and I should try hard to give you one. But that's not a lot of people that I've got to deal with. And I'm the only one down there right now who's really looking to deal with it. Agree.
We realize that there's no real legislation except the law that goes into effect in 2 weeks that says that abrogates home rule for municipalities and counties and says you can't tell an end user where to put his turbine. And that goes into effect January 1st, which is pretty scary.
Is it state law?
State law tacked on with nobody looking, that's us, but not wind farms. Nobody else is state. What a coincidence. So,
Could you take
I-
one of my business cards and send me the
I would
citation
love
for
to,
that,
because
please?
I would love to know what the relationship this is between those. And the only thing I can say is that the only way to stop turbines being put within 100 feet of endangered species is, no, there's no law, but there's people, you know? And last time, it kind of just slid by. But now, you know, there's moratoriums all over Lake County. And people need to speak up. When Aldridge was asked, did you have any kind of environmental study? Their response was, well, the village didn't make us do it.
Right.
So
A lot of companies do not do one unless it's required.
it's us as citizens have to make the village make them do it.
Well, this is the point I made earlier. Most units of local government are not used to requiring environmental studies because they don't really consider it to be their job. They think the state or the federal government is going to do that type of thing. And in this case, the federal government in this case haven't done that kind of thing. Now, in Wisconsin, they have a different system. In Wisconsin, below a certain level, it's local control. Above a certain level of project, it's state control. So all the developers up there make sure their projects are big enough that they go to the state, because the state doesn't care what happens to the local and authorizes the project, despite what the locals might think of it. So it's a big bone of contention in Wisconsin as well.
Right, and there was just that court case that the counties can't tell
Right.
people.
Well, this one that I mentioned here, this beach-rich decision, we're looking at that very closely. We have very similar language in our Endangered Species Act, as the Federal Endangered Species Act, pertaining to what they call fully future violations. In other words, violations that might happen only in the future, rather than violations that are happening right now. In other words, we say it's against the law to kill it, injure it, harm it, or to attempt to do anything that might result in it. Well, basically what the court in Maryland said was even planting a wind farm is a take if you haven't gotten your permits for endangered species first. We have that kind of language in our statute. What we don't have in our statute, it's in the federal statute, is a citizen lawsuit provision. The action in Maryland was brought by a local group that was opposed to that particular project under a citizen supervision in federal law. We don't have that in Illinois under any statute that I know of except the mining statute, which is patterned after the federal statute, does have a citizen supervision. So it's not unheard of in Illinois law, but it's not part of the Endangered Species Act. So, and it's a big departure from past practice in Illinois to talk about violations that might happen because you're building something in a particular way. That's a huge leap. That's the leap the federal court made for the Indiana bat. We have to look at that because we have Indiana bats. But if we're doing that for Indiana bats, we might be doing that for other endangered species as well, because you can make that case in a lot of cases. If there's a way that what you're doing could end up killing or harming one of these things, then if you want to do that kind of thing, you have to come to us for a permit. We have one person who looks at incidental take permits in Illinois. We've only had the authority to issue an incidental take permit since 2000. Before that, we just had to say no way, Jose, or cover our eyes, which is usually what happened. We've probably issued 50 or 60 of those in the last 7 years. We've never said no to an incidental take authorization for an endangered species to this point. There might be some cases where we would have to say no, but we would probably say yes, and somebody would have to sue us and say, why did you say yes?
And that's why we didn't go to the Department of Natural Resources. Well,
No, and I don't mean to say that, you know, we're not doing our job. It's just that all things evolve.
I'm saying
All things evolve, and this is one of those things. This case that happened last week is going to cause a lot of reevaluation of how people do
yes,
things.
and we're hoping for that, because you know, you're in Lake County, where we are, we're surrounded by parks and forest reserve and the river and natural and restored wetlands.